Hello, John. So I'm Thomas Bolduc. I'm here in the Fraser Valley, just about an hour away from Sean there. I'm drinking my pink cranberry sparkling water tonight because I've got some work to do. But I'm an architectural technologist and I enjoy building science, and that's kind of one of those things. So I'm really excited too to see what Brian has to say here as well. Justin, how about you, buddy?
Hey everyone, I'm Justin Ott from Saskatchewan. Yeah, we do custom homes and renovations and focusing on high performance builds, net zeros, passives, and yeah, don't get me started on building science because we could probably drink a lot of beer trying to go through all that. So tonight I've been putting in the hours. I don't think it's any better than beer. I'm actually drinking Red Bull. So cheers.
All right, well, at least I know who will be awake the entire time. So, Brian, you can do whatever you want, but I think Justin will be hanging in with you for the full evening. I definitely will. I know Aaron, I see his iPhone. I know that he's traveling, they've got stuff going on. So if he decides to chime in, and since I did do a faux pas, Connor, I didn't hit the record button. I thought I did. So you and I didn't get our intro. So just for the recording, that guy there is Connor Malloy. I'm Sean Sanamore. We're great to be here on BS&BEER Canada, October 17th. Here we go. We've got Brian Cooke, and he has been involved with AeroBarrier Canada and then AeroSeal. So we're going to dive into the product, the process, great strategy for air sealing your home, and again, all the different details of why this product should be, discussed in your AeroBarrier strategy. And a couple of discussions I've had this week is it shouldn't be the last resort for firefighting. It should be earlier discussed, and I know he will dive into that. But prior to that, he spent a long time with Kimberly Clark and different roles, managerial roles, but 7 fun years with that. And I'm sure along the way, building science has always been involved in dinner discussions with you and your family and all that great stuff. So, Brian, we'll turn it over to you. Let's dive into AeroSeal. Let's go.
Thanks, Sean, for the nice intro, and feeling it's Oktoberfest, so I got a German polliner here for the activities as part of the beer part. And yeah, and so thank you for that intro. We were talking quickly on the preamble here as we were getting to know each other, what got me into this originally. And yeah, very different background. I was selling toilet paper and Kleenex, but my family has a long history in building science, and so some might know the name Gord Cooke, but really our family business was originally kind of launching HRVs back in the early days of Saskatchewan. And so help him and partners help bring that, I'm proud to say, help bring that to Canada and the US. And that evolved into, well, how do you sell HRVs? Well, you got to start talking about air tightness. And so they started doing building science training, blower door testing across the country, consulting work, trying to kind of center it around, all right, well, if you're going to build them tight, you need ventilation and vice versa. And then that kind of came to AeroBarrier and AeroSeal. Basically, Gord in his travels, my father saw this product in development out of a company out of Dayton, Ohio, met the owner, and was just so excited about the potential problems that it could solve. The answer for builders that he's been watching struggle for years, worrying about passing a blower door test, and a game changer, and said, hey, I want to help bring that to Canada and try to make it as meaningful as possible and really help have it find a foothold. And so at that time, myself, it was a good time to make a career change. And so my partner and I were the first AeroBarrier dealership in quite frankly, in Canada, and about a week, I was like, missed it by a week. We are second in North America. And so we've been at it since 2018, learning lots. And so while I have a father from a building science world, a lot of these lessons were learned the hard way with boots and mud and cold and hot on the site. And so we've learned lots in our 6 years of being in market, and excited to share kind of our journey a little bit and where we fit in, and knowing the expertise that is on this call. Happy to answer any questions that are lingering out there or that is on anyone's mind. So figure always reset back to those slides from Saskatchewan and the conservation house and where that connection to building science really starts, why air tightness is important, where we see building codes heading. While you guys are leading the pack, I'd say this audience, there's a lot of us, or a lot of the industry still has a long way to go, and there's kind of those leading the industry, but there's also a big push. And Sean, you'd know probably in the Vancouver market, there's builders who are trying to catch up to the step code, and it can put a lot of anxiety into the whole industry. What that looks like from an air barrier perspective, there's lots of great products out there that all can be successful, but they all have their own unique challenges, and where our technology maybe fits in with that. And then just a real another introduction of what we do, why we think it fits into the building industry, and then again, happy to answer any questions from there that arise. So what do we know? Again, I like to start with slides that are older than I am, and these are from original R2000 Natural Resource Canada research. And so new homes, air leakage can account for up to 40% of our energy use, and for Justin in Saskatchewan, that's a lot. That's very important, and that's why they focused on air tightness first. And as we think about new buildings today, building code, think roughly about 25 to 30% of our energy use, but the pie of energy that we're trying to save, the biggest slice still is, if we can get air tightness figured out, we're going to be able to save most amount of energy and head towards operational carbon savings that Sean was talking a little bit on his intro to beer, or his beer introduction. And so, but we focus a lot on energy, and I think sometimes to a detriment. Really, air tightness and why we want to focus on it is really the building science part of it. It's the same air leakage that we're leaking energy. We're also introducing moisture and noise problems and dust problems. And ultimately, what you're going to sell your homeowner on is you're talking about building performance. All of the things that you want to do to build the best house possible, all start and finish really with air tightness in a lot of ways. And that can vary hour to hour, day to day, season to season, coast to coast, as we're talking about different building science challenges, east to west coast. Again, this same topic comes up and up again, and we want to try to find a repeatable solution to solve for it. Again, slides that are older than I am, the primary reason why we are working towards reducing air leakage is really about moisture control. And so even a small air leakage of 1 square inch hole in a sheet of drywall in a heating season can carry almost 30 liters of water through that wall. And as you think about what that moisture is hitting is, warm inside, warm moist air from inside, hitting a cold surface on the outside can cause a whole lot of damage. And this is primarily why, as a builder or anyone in the industry, we always want to start first with thinking about, or at least second, about air leakage. And here's a cool little demonstration of what that can kind of look like. So that warm, moist air here, you'll see these little arrows flow through, and when it hits that outside of that cold wall, it condenses, and this can cause a whole lot of damage, mold problems. And we've seen and sat on, unfortunately, in our family's history, Terrion claims, gorgeous homes tore down in years, homeowners in tears, and everyone goes back to what the heck happened. And it's you didn't pay attention to air leakage. And so after shear water protection, air leakage in a lot of ways becomes the second most important thing in terms of building a building that's going to last. And here's a picture of mold. It's it's a little bit of fear. What it can look like. And so talk about indoor air quality, and this is an air leakage mold problem. And so I won't spend a lot of time on the fear, but the idea is we're solving for energy, but we're actually doing what's right for our homeowners more than anything. And so I always like to start and ground ourselves in that. The code. Why does the building code have air leakage in it? Again, it didn't start from an energy perspective. This all started to deal with moisture. And if you look at the building code 9.25.3, it starts to talk about include an air barrier system with continuous. And then it will go on to reference the word sealed, continuous 13 times. What continuity air barrier system shall be prevent air leakage. And for the most part, this is as far as it goes. It just says it needs to be sealed 13 times, very seriously. But then in most parts of the country, Sean, you get away from this, we don't even bother testing for it. But so the code says it has to be airtight. It doesn't tell you what that means. And we find this kind of, ambiguous. And ultimately, you get a lawyer this verbiage, and we might know that 3 air changes or 2 air changes or 1.5 air changes is a pretty darn good score. If it just says it should be sealed, is there actually liability? And again, we've sat in Tarion claims arguing over what the level of air tightness should have been. And so when these questions come up of should there be mandatory air tightness testing in codes, it actually gives some assurance to builders that, hey, this is what I'm supposed to get to, and we can kind of move on and work on some of the next challenges, maybe, you know, embodied carbon and those sort of things as an industry. And as I kind of started talking about those things, code and where we're heading, and you know, we went through a big cycle this year nationally. We took a big step where we used to have all different building codes across the country with unique differences and different pieces. You know, BC was really taking a leadership role and pushing it. And at least this year, we moved towards a harmonized building code. And the idea of this is trying to match somewhat what's going on in British Columbia, but the idea is everyone's on the same system. Maybe different provinces start at different levels and tiers, but we're all marching towards the same goal by the same time, that every home needs to be kind of to that net zero ready level, or you know, passive house. Like we're heading there, and you know what the time frame is. The goalpost might move, but the doubt of when or if we're going that way, I think, is behind us. And so here in Ontario, we said, okay, based on our code, we're starting at tier 3, and you know, some of the mid provinces, you know, prairies, maybe you're at 2. East Coast, I've heard some 2s. The idea, though, is we're going to chart the path, and each province has to plot their way towards getting better. And right around 3, you really start having to do blower door testing. Quite frankly, there's not a whole lot left after that to improve from an energy perspective. And so it's not a matter really in our minds of if, but just when mandatory blower door testing will, you know, be in every single build. And I think we should all feel good about that, just based on, again, what we've talked about, moisture problems, the energy side of things, and just the assurance that, you know, we know that we can't get sued for maybe not hitting a target at the end of the day. And so heading towards this, you know, in the US, you know, I think 22 states already have mandatory blower door testing. You know, I think most Canadians might be embarrassed to know that Texas has a stricter blower door testing protocol than we do here in Canada. You know, that especially with the election going on, that feels a little foreign. But you know, I think, you know, we've been leaders in this space, and it's only a matter of time until we get there again. So heading on this path towards net zero, and what does that really mean? So Natural Resources Canada has put us on this path, and they did a comprehensive study back, I think, in 2011 of what the heck does this mean? How are we going to get there? Net zero, oh my God. And they interviewed folks like yourselves on this call, architects, builders, energy advisors, engineers across the country, and said, hey, what's the best to do that? And you take that 200-page document, you put it onto a slide today, and really fundamentally it boils down to, it's always cheaper to save a watt of energy than it is to try to generate it. And the steps from an efficiency standpoint, cost-wise, generally we're going to follow this order. We're going to improve the envelope of our homes as much as possible to a marginal tipping point. Once we do that, we're going to downsize and resize our mechanicals, and then match it with renewable energy sources to be able to get to that net zero. And these are things that the passive house community has been doing for years as well. It's no real different formula of how we get there, net zero or passive. It may be different choices at the end, but the fundamentals of the framework are the same. And in this report, the executive summary and referenced a lot in those 200 pages is the industry said, yeah, but the air tightness, I just don't know how we're going to do it consistently. The GTA builders, and I like to poke at them because they're here, they've made a very big claim. Like, we can never imagine a world that we'd ever be able to get to under 2 on every single home without major changes. And I think this is where you think see where I'm heading, kind of comes down to where we think we fit in. And so within that air tightness piece, you know, there's lots of different ways. Here in Ontario, we do a lot of poly as our primary air barrier, and we see a lot of interesting things on site, right? We know that the poly is the air barrier. You know, we have building inspectors saying, okay, you need to put that black goopy stuff behind it in certain spots. And some of that ends up being a lot of wasted effort. We don't necessarily think through it because we don't know where that air leakage is really coming from. We don't, as an industry, really understand the nuances it at a wider scale across all the trades that contribute it. We see some wasted effort, extra materials, time, consternation, and we still at the end of the day go, ooh, I don't know if we're going to be able to get there. we see funny things. People start just putting caulking everywhere and spray foaming funny things. And again, this isn't, I've been guilty of it too. We still do it sometimes, tracing these leaks around, thinking, well, that might be leaking, might as well put a bead of caulking there. And, you know, the passive house community, sometimes I ask them, and like, how long does this take you? And they're spending weeks doing this, putting tape on Sega tape on top of Sega tape on top of Sega tape, thinking that, well, maybe that was the flap of tape that was leaking a little bit. And all to say, this is really hard. And we don't really know, so we just throw stuff at it in general to get the results that we want to. There's lots of products out there that claim airtightness, great products, quite frankly, that have certain pros and cons. Spray foam maybe provides a higher R value per inch, talks about airtightness, you know, has the caveat of you're trying to perform science on site with different temperatures. The mixture has to be right. Humidity control. Was the gun clean? Ooh, now we're getting dicey and inconsistent results based on the conditions of the day. Was it Monday? Was it Friday afternoon? Was he trying to get, you know, out to his boat? Who knows? And ultimately, spray foam en masse probably comes up a little short, as do most great air tightness products. There are literally everything can be an air barrier. They're all great. It all comes down to the caveat of how well were they installed. And that ends up being a challenge because it's shared across so many different trades. I can install the zip panels perfectly and I can roll the tape and I can get there. But if my HVAC guy didn't, you know, seal in his penetrations properly, that all goes out. Or, you know, I can install my zip panels, but maybe my window flashing or patio doors, whatever those details are, that could have been a completely different trade. My electrician came and ran his wires after and didn't fill that hole. Ultimately, this gets filled in across up to 10 to 15 different trades, all working together, with none of them particularly owning the idea that the building has to be airtight, which ultimately means it falls onto the builder's shoulders. You know, we work with all of these products and see great results. It's just ultimately the anxiety that comes with, is that house going to perform just as well as the next one? So that's really where we ultimately feel our role is. And what AeroBarrier is an answer to that. Sealing the envelope isn't easy. Current process is pretty time consuming across the board, regardless of what materials people are using. It can be inconsistent on any site. Every construction site is a little different. Is there a walkout? Even the same model, sometimes there's a walkout, sometimes there's a higher ceiling. Even on this in production builds with the same model types, there can be nuanced differences that cause big problems. And that inconsistency is what has held everyone back, and goes back to that, I think, report that says, hey, how do we get to 2 on every house? And it's this idea of a multi-step process. There's lots of people who have figured this process out, but really their solve has been a really detailed process that they have to maintain and enforce and work across so many different trades. That has ultimately been our best solution up until this point. And we feel like our product adds a little bit of certainty to that space. And so game-changing solution that's convenient and when applied and planned for, can be, in our opinion, can be very cost effective. In a half a day, you can check the box and move on and start to get to the highest levels of airtightness. If you think about that staircase that I was showing on the step code, we work with builders on all those steps, and we can help you get to the top of them. And one of the best things about it is you can implement it today, right? A lot of the process changes and products that are out there, you make one change, it causes 3 or 4 upstream or downstream on your model types, things that you need to think about. Fundamentally, one of my favorite things to talk about AeroBarriers, keep doing whatever you're doing. Like, it's probably working for you for a lot of reasons. You can add AeroBarrier and have a tighter home tomorrow. And so where a lot of technologies or products within the building industry, force us to think about 4 or 5 different things, as long as you have your ventilation kind of solved for, and in Canada, for the most part, we do here, you can add AeroBarrier and take a step up that path towards net zero from wherever you are. And so what does that process really look like? We have a dealership kind of network across the country. And so whoever your local dealer is will show up, whether either a truck and trailer or maybe a van setup. And kind of step one is really prepping the house, if you will. And They'll tape off and cover any intentional openings, things that we don't want to seal, bathroom fans, furnace, vents, window openings, any horizontal finishes, goods, things like windowsills. We're going to kind of take them out, cover them off, take them out of the equation, and set up our equipment, which fundamentally, if anyone's ever seen a blower door test, it looks pretty much the same. Most of the steps are the same. We're going to set up that big red door, put a fan in the building into that door, and set up a couple of our sealing stations in some of the larger rooms of the building. Those sealing stations will start misting in sealant into the air under the pressure of a blower door. So generally when we do testing, we're doing a depressurized test for air tightness. In this case, we're going to pressurize the house with the same fan. And under pressure, we're going to mist in the sealant into, again, the largest rooms of the house. And those sealant particles floating around are going to try to escape under that pressure. Think about an air in a balloon, they're going to rush towards the hole. And the physics of it is, as the air approaches a hole, the particles accelerate through it and they start to coagulate and gather on themselves, seeking out, finding, and sealing any leakage areas up to 1/2 inch as they go along. So this targeted, guided approach that uses the air leakage to send sealant just to where it's leaking, and we'll actually find it and seal it. Anything up to, again, 1/2 inch holes, cracks, or gaps, cracks throughout the buildings, in behind spaces that you couldn't find. These are going to get those 10,000 death by little cuts that you were going to pull your hair out for weeks trying to find under that pressure of the blower door. The coolest part about this fundamentally is it's a test and a seal at the same time. So we're getting live results as we're applying it. The first thing we'll find out is when we step up, we'll know, hey, this is where the house is starting. We're going to start seeing that air leakage tick away on a graph. We're going to be able to run the process to whatever desired target we want for that day, to a point. And so this is finding the littlest holes. So here's a shim pack. If you zoom in, we've been showing this photo now for about 4 years. And in that little bit of gap between a shim pack, that was leaking. And you could be the greatest passive house builder in the world, and you would never have found that leak. It might not have mattered if you never found it, but most people who are building passive house are trying to find zero, and this, you would never have found that this thing was leaking. And so the idea is it's finding all of the little ones that we just didn't know were there. And there's lots of different examples of what that looks like. Here's a cutout, and it will seal around electrical box. Here's an outlet. And again, these are, think about all of the situations throughout the house that maybe were missed, you didn't find, connection point, change of materials, flap of tape. It's going to seek out, find, and seal them. And again, the coolest part about it is we now have our finger on the dial, able to take the house down to whatever we desired, really own the design process from up front. And so here's just an example. Each house has a seal report attached to it. This individual one started at 6 air changes, finished at 1.2 on our software for the day in roughly under 3 hours. So in half a day, what might have taken a passive house team or net zero team weeks, we can move on and get back to the important part of building, which is delivering on time and on budget. We did this at a bigger scale. We work with production builders and look over that OSHA violation in the background there, but we followed a production crew around that was doing really well. Fundamentally, they were getting 1.5 on all their homes, thousands of homes a year. And we followed them around for 6 months, tallied what they were on a clipboard. Hey, this is how much time we're spending. They were spending about roughly about $1,000 in labor hours in their mind, and about $1,000 in slush fund, if you will, of caulking, tape, and foam, which is they just roll into a big budget. And when they actually looked at it, like, oh man, oh no, we can do this. We're not spending any money on it. It is a line item on your budget. It's just something you're calling something else. And this is, again, a builder who's been doing it for years, pretty successful. And then on top of that, production builder, you ask them what their most important asset is. It's their site super. And that site super on testing day, he's spending the whole day wondering, am I going to pass? Am I going to pass? Well, he didn't sleep that night. And he's managing 100 trades. And yet he's dedicating for each house a full day on whether or not, even though they are passing most of them, it's still keeping them up at night. And you can start to think about what that could save you when you take that off of your plate and worrying. And then finally, like just as a thought starter, when you start knowing what your air tightness results are going to be up front, it opens up some interesting design choices and playbooks. You can really unlock the performance side of the building code, take credit for the biggest slice of the pie from an energy perspective. You know, we see this a lot in custom homes. Every architect, what do they want? They want to put more windows in. Well, the code says you can only put in 20%, 22%. Well, if you show that the house is performing with air tightness, maybe you can start to play with that ratio. Or maybe you downsize your HVAC equipment from a design perspective, and now you don't have big bulkheads running through certain spaces. And there's design elements to this, there's comfort elements, there's durability elements that all plays back. And once you know that for sure that you're going to have your air tightness target, you can open up a whole lot of interesting conversations with your clients about from a design and product selections. You know, just finally, just another way to look at it. If you look at kind of like the standard upgrades that can go into when you energy model it, this is, all right, I'm going to add an extra R10 in my attic. Doesn't do anything. At this point, we've put enough insulation on our attics in most places in Canada. Okay, I'm going to put an extra inch on the outside. Well, you save, 1,000 kilowatts a year. Or if you take a standard house from 3 to 1 air changes, you save 2,000 kilowatts. So if you're going to upgrade any choice from an energy perspective, air tightness ends up being the one that wins time and time again. The sealant itself, what is it? It's normally the question. I'm sure it's in the chat already at some point. What is it? What are you spraying? Really, it's a caulking material. It's not all that special. It's really the process in which we're applying it that's different. We're atomizing it, mixing with compressed air, but it's a acrylic caulking, no off-gassing, ultra low VOC. And one of the things I like talking about quite a bit is because it's so targeted, we're putting a very little amount into the house. So we're putting a little bit amount of sealant, inert sealant, only to where it needs to go. So when you start thinking about it from an embodied carbon perspective, it's off the charts as well, because we're putting in so little of anything. From an improvement standpoint, again, it stacks up really nicely. Our brief history, I hope I'm okay for time, just double checking. We've done about 10,000 of these now across the country. We'll do about 40,000 in North America this year. A little bit of everything: single family, townhomes, multifamily, big buildings, leafy buildings. We did a shed once, anywhere from 20 air changes. We've started houses that are at 0.5 and see how low we can take them. And what's cool about this is wherever you are, it will make it tighter. And on average, about 70% from wherever your starting point. So if you're at 3, this will get you to 1.5. If you're at 1.5, this gets you to 0.6. If you're 0.6 and you want to brag on the next building science and beer, give us a call and you can have the tightest home built in the area. So we're really proud of, and we like talking about, we can really work with anyone. We work with production builders, the biggest ones in Canada, as a solution for them to do it on a really big basis. And then we're proud of working with, in our minds, some of the best custom house builders, just because they're like, if for the houses I'm building, I just want to deliver that for my client, whatever the best version of it is, and it takes a little bit off my plate. I'm actually at our family cottage in off Lake Huron, and a builder that we've known for years, and his family's been building under one for the last 30 years. It's a father-son company, and eventually they're just like, yeah, I'm just going to do AeroBarrier just because it just takes a little time off our plate, and I know for the houses I'm building here, I just want to be able to deliver that. So really feel like we can offer a wide range of help. And then just in summary, we for lots of reasons, air tightness is and always will be the most important thing that we're still trying to solve from a building science perspective at scale. Code's going to push us that way anyways. Most of us on this call are probably a little ahead of it, but why not be further? And why not just really check it off and be done with it? And we feel like we can offer a consistent approach to that. And we're happy to work with you in whatever format that looks like. And so, like, we have dealers across the country that would be really excited to talk to you pretty much in every market. And yeah, let us know how we can work together, and happy to answer any questions kind of about what I've rattled off so far.
Great stuff, Brian. Again, take a breather, have a sip of your beverage. Amazing insight. I mean, I love the history. I mean, what your family and your dad has done. I mean, I use your dad's line all the time right now. In the industry, we're dealing with the dumb tax, which is the learning curve of adopting and improving our building science systems and ensuring that we're providing comfort and health. And so, definitely some great explanations here tonight too of just how, some systems can really drive better performing home. And if you're not putting your air tightness strategy top of mind, you're going to have some issues, and just some great details there and cost analysis of it all, and fantastic stuff. And again, air tightness is the best mechanical system you can put in there, and you've provided a really good system. We've got a couple questions. Great. We got Jeff, Connor, and myself. So, gentlemen, Thomas, Justin, Connor, do you guys have any comments, questions before we kind of come back to us as well as our audience?
Justin, go ahead.
I was just curious as to what testing's been done for the longevity of the air sealing.
Yep. So it's been, I normally answer the question in a couple ways. And so from a lab perspective, it's been tested from a durability standpoint, heating and cooling, simulated for 50 years. And, from all intents and purposes, passes with flying colors. The other way I like to describe it a little bit is the sealant isn't new, in that it's a repurposed building product that's been used in commercial building for 25 years. And we're just really applying, think about taking a caulking that we're really comfortable using in homes and applying it with a different brush, if you will. And then finally, actually the house I was talking about was one of our first ones that we did here in 2019 when we first launched. And just, because we're curious, my dad and I came out last year and threw a blower door on it, and, the results, and we, sitting on Lake Huron where the storms push and blow pretty good. We were proud to say the house hadn't moved really at all in the 5 years that it's been in market. So, I will caveat, because you will see this quite a bit too. There is a difference, and we explain this, every time we talk to a builder. Our test in itself is a little different than a standard blower door test, in that it's a pressurized test that we're taking out some of the key elements of a blower door test. When you do a final for passive house or net zero, you're going to do what's called an as operated test. And the things that we're taping off, bathroom fans, mechanicals, all have a little bit of leakage to them. And even just the setup of, we set up our door, it seals literally our blower door. The first thing to do is we take that down. So there will be a difference between our score and what your final is. And we work with our, raters and builders to really understand what that difference is going to be and predict for it. So that sometimes even people are like, well, it got worse, and it's predictable, and we work with builders on what that gap is.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.
Connor, do you want to go ahead before we go to Jeff?
No, Jeff. You got the
Jeff,
floor.
if you want to unmute and go ahead and ask your question, go for it there, Jeff. If not, I will ask it for you, but I will give you the opportunity. Jeff asked, will the blower door test be required for just new builds or also for remodels as well? And it's an open-ended, it depends question, Brian, but I'll let you take it first, and then I'll add some comments.
Yeah, it is a good question. You look at, the Greener Energy Grant Program that, ran up until this point, and, any energy audit normally starts with a blower door test. So, there's a world where maybe, there's a version for housing where, you think about selling a car and you have to get an emissions test. It's been kicked around that you might have to have an energy audit before you sell a house, particularly with the aggressive goals that we have from a climate action perspective. That would be probably down the road, but it's not outside the world of possibility. And then particularly as you think about any voluntary program, there's a really cool net zero remodel or a net, retrofit passive house. And you're for sure going to have the blower door test for those. And so lots of applications in existing homes, mandatory probably down the road.
So Jeff, does that answer your question? See it
Yes,
popped on there.
Yes, it does. I actually had a second question. If
Fire away.
so, with air sealing, I know it works great. I've heard great stories from people doing new homes. How is it for doing remodels?
Yeah, the last part about what makes it easier on new homes is won't settle or stick to vertical surfaces, but the material will settle on horizontal finished surfaces. So if you have a fully furnished home and that you're living in, the amount of prep work and risk of the sealant getting on your stuff becomes a bigger challenge. But the efficacy of being able to move the air tightness, we would say that there's no easier way to do that. It's really, really hard to move the needle in an existing home. There's actually our Calgary dealer just did an example of this where they did a retro fit on there without touching the walls, and they actually took their house to a net zero. And AeroBarrier was one of the parts to that. So in a lot of ways, it moves the needle probably better than anything else can, but it depends on how much remodeling you're doing makes the cost equation maybe feasible.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, great question, Jeff. And I mean, here in BC, where we've got the BC Energy Step Code already moving things forward a little faster than the rest of Canada. I mean, we've already heard discussions of the retrofit code coming in play. Ideally 2027. It was supposed to be earlier. And honestly, given our provincial election happening on Saturday, might be postponed, whatever. We'll see what happens on Saturday. But there is definitely discussions about retrofit. Retrofit Canada is new in Canada. It's been about for 3 years. There's been a lot of policy conversations, but we know that in our climate emergency situation, that the existing buildings are the ones that need to get fixed. And what Brian's proposing with AeroSeal, I mean, it's a great resource. And I love it too, because in all the high performance conversations you should be talking about an acrylic sealant. If it's not, then you got to talk to your people about, okay, that tuck tape is not going to work. Might work for the day, but definitely won't work in your blower door test. And so the acrylic products really need to happen. And so I got a bunch of questions, Brian, for you. The first one would be how often do you get clients that, you turn the machine on, you quickly get to the score that's required, and then they say, okay, well, why don't you just keep going? Like, what's, hey, they see the price tag worked until a point, and they're like, well, just keep going. Like,
yeah, for the most part, this is where every dealership's a little different, but we still run our dealership here. And for the most part, the biggest cost is showing up. It's the mobilization, like any crew based kind of setup. So once you're there, running it a little further, you might as well. And especially in the custom homes, you get the homeowner standing over your shoulder, and it's like, all right, let's pull up a chair. Let's see how long we can take it. There's other worlds where we're, in a production site, that crew needs to do 4 of them a day. And so, that time economics comes into place, but quite a bit. And once you're there, you might as well take it down, and you'll kind of see it. That graph I showed, it looks pretty similar on every job. So it curves out, and eventually, like, it kind of gets to the point of, all right, we're not really getting much more out of this. And so you'll see that on pretty much every AeroBarrier job. It gets to the point where, like, all right, it is sealed the things that it can get to.
And so, Brian, maybe just comment about, how big of a hole will it seal? Because I know at some point, if it's a 3-inch hole, it's not gonna get there. So just to comment about again is like, you're talking about pinholes, great, but when the pinhole turns to a bullet hole, turns into a giant gap in your assembly, how does that manage?
Yeah, great question. And so we've learned that lesson the hard way. We're like, if you had this webinar in 2019, I would have like, you can seal it all, we'll get you there. And we've learned to maybe take that down a notch of like, hey, up to 1/2 inch, and then generally, pretty confidently, it will improve wherever you're at, 60 to 70%. And then what I didn't talk about it today, but here's a chance. I talk about what makes AeroBarrier cool. It's both a test and a seal, but it's also a diagnostic tool, right? So the way you would find those large leakage holes, traditionally, you'd set up a blower door test, put a smoke machine in, and see where the smoke comes out. That is every AeroBarrier application. So all of the crews, for the most part, are carrying caulking guns, foam guns, tape, and AeroBarrier will tell you where those holes are while you're applying it, and you can tackle them as you go. And so you can help using it as a diagnostic tool. So we're really confident in that vein to be able to help our builders hit their targets. It might mean doing some more traditional air sealing along the way. I like to talk about it as like, we're a very powerful tool in the toolkit of air sealing, but you're also going to carry some other things in your belt to be able to get the job done.
Yeah, I know. Great stuff, Brandon. And I mean, coming back to that whole retrofit conversation is, typically in retrofits, the first thing you do is change out the windows. Then you're trying to figure out the fresh air machine. But in air sealing, you're right. Like if you can make sure that grandma's antique chair doesn't get acrylic all over it, this is a really great way to air seal before you have to, pull off the cladding and add on the extra insulation and, deal with some thermal bridging details. So it's a really good solution for in the retrofit area. So yeah, we got a couple more questions. Omar, actually, sorry, Connor, did you want to talk about your question?
Yeah, I'll try and be quick. I have so many questions for you. It's I'm gonna try and be succinct. I'm gonna forget for a second that I know something about air sealing. I'm talking with a builder who's a colleague right now, and they're exploring building some family housing, and they've been passionate about building better. I think everyone here, refers themselves as a craft person. They really do believe they build high quality homes, but airtightness has never been a thing they're really that confident on. And to be honest, they've been a bit afraid to actually go and test their buildings because it's like the head in the sand of what if it's really bad? And what if it's not even at code minimum? I just don't want to know. Like no one's asking me for this number. But recently, they've been targeting building some conversions where they have to really get their air leakage down and get their envelope and insulations up so they can actually stay within a certain hydro service because they're going all electric. So what's a big motivator for them is, we have to now hit for their energy goals, 1 air change per hour. They've never done a test at all on any single project. And I think what's exciting for them and why I shared that use case is the fact that you can come in and help them, run a diagnostic test, show them where their team is succeeding and failing, or how there's opportunities rather in how they're building, and then offer an ability to get to the number they have to, I think kind of gives builders some comfort level in knowing, okay, when I want to build tighter and on my next project, based on what the goals are, there's a way that I can get there. We're going to do our best, learn from Sean, learn from all these amazing resources, but the fact that you have this almost like an insurance policy, I think to help them get there and learn, I think is pretty magical. You've talked me into buying a franchise, so good job.
All right, it's awesome. Yeah, no, everything you said there, that's kind of what Gord's original version was. He's been dealing with that anxiety that you talk with clients with that anxiety of, oh man, what if I don't pass? And that's ultimately why blower door testing isn't in the code right now. That anxiety is so strong that, as a home builders association, we've probably lobbied against it because that test scares us at scale for lots of reasons. We don't want to slow down and other things to solve, but yeah, that's where we feel like you pegged it. Our role really is we're an answer to a problem that has given this industry a lot of anxiety for a lot of years.
100%. Like I think talking to folks, it's the part of the building you can't see. I joked, you can see a carpenter's tight miters. You can see when that door is plumbed. You can see when the cabinet millwork is aligned. Air leakage you can't see until the damage is really done. But the fact that you can test for that, and to put my builder hat back on again, and I think Armin has the same question. Can you just walk us through what, we've got a single family detached house in Oshawa. It's 2,000 square feet. Our current leakage rate, let's say, is 3 air change per hour, and we want to get down to that net zero 1.5. Just roughly, walk us through what that looks. I know numbers are hard. I get it, but we're going to ask you anyways.
That's good. No, this might be a record. We got to almost the end of the call. We didn't have to talk about price. That's good. I've held off as long as I can. Good question. And so I'll preface it, a couple ways. First, it's a dealer network, and so each dealer sets their own pricing for lots of different reasons, and the key variables that go into it for us, if I put my dealer hat on, is, how many units are we talking? If like, that the price we offer Mattamy Homes for thousands of homes for a day, different than a custom home. So there's a little bit of that. And then, what is your starting air leakage type? Where are you trying to go? But really for us, that's a kind of a crew mobilization for the day, the what you're describing. And, think, anywhere between, depending on your dealer, $1 to $1.25 a square foot, as a starting point. And again, there's lots of reasons where that might be more or less, but, pretty comfortably in between that range to get going.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you, Brian, an idea over here in Vancouver is our reps over here were like $2 a square foot to get started and $2.50 at final. And so, and it, like as you indicated, is the further along you don't call you, further along there's more setup, there's more things to protect, and more things to be aware of. So earlier the better. And again, when we look at the details, is depending on your air barrier strategy is when you come out. So if it's poly stage, fine. If it's a drywall stage, it is. Ideally, you would agree too, is if you can see the leaks and you can see where your product can go, then you get an idea of those issues because the diagnostic systems that it pertains in. So great stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, one second. Mute. Okay, carry on.
I saw in the chat a couple different price point, and here's what I'll say. So it does vary, particularly to like, the smaller the space, price per square foot kind of breaks down too. So like getting us there for, if it was 1,000 square foot, it's hard to manage a crew at that point. So it does. People like to talk in price per square foot. Our technology doesn't necessarily scale all that match perfectly to that. So all to say, if it is a pricing conversation, by all means, reach out to me. We work with our network, and ultimately we want to find a solution that works for everyone. And so happy to work through that.
Yeah, and I mean, Brian, what's nice too about the conversation is just the fact now that our insulation crew can also be the air barrier crew, and our exterior cladding crew can also be the air barrier crew, really, comes down, and even the framer by trying to put in floppy bits. I mean, they're all part of the air sealing strategy. And so the question is do they just do their craft and then do this bonus air sealing, or is air sealing now being reliant on your system and your crew, and how does that factor into the budget? And like again, it can get tricky, but at the same time, knowing that if you don't hit your air barrier tightness scores for the city inspection, then what's the penalty for just the house sitting and waiting in your schedule and the budget and clients unhappiness?
We can jump in here. There's a question from Omar. Is it better to apply air barrier at the framing, poly, or interior vapor control, air barrier, or drywall stage, Brian?
Yeah, good question. I think a little bit of it comes down to preference. I think you could probably make a pros and cons list for, and really ultimately the answer is, what is your air barrier strategy, right? There's exterior air barriers, interior. What is your product? Like, what does that mix look like? It might vary. What's nice about AeroBarrier is that the flexibility in the schedule, right? So we can come late up into the drywall stage. A lot of work gets done at that stage, because the comfort you get out of that is that there's less chance someone's going to come with the hole saw after you're done. You're closest to that final, and just the nature of how we're applying it, the sealant will travel to where it needs that pressure difference. So there's value in coming later. But there's times where coming earlier makes sense too, when particularly, this is my opinion, but when you're trying to do, that diagnostic piece of it. And so if you're using it and maybe you still have some larger issues that you might need to address, you still have access to them. So there's times that we do both. I normally go back to the builder, schedule is really important to builders. And so I like to try to, when I'm positioning it, what works best for them. Ultimately, I don't think there's a huge difference in efficacy on when we apply it.
Thank you.
And maybe just want to comment too, like, I don't know how many builders that are here tonight, how they factor in air sealing into their, revised high performance building schedule. I mean, we typically put in a week because of just the diagnostics and the fact that, we could have air seal come in one day and now all of a sudden we've saved 4 days, or 4 days gets transferred to maybe like a buffer, or, or maybe it gets advanced. But I know that we just put in a week just because of whatever happens. And sometimes it's, we do the blower door score, or sorry, we do our bring in our energy advisor, do our tests, and it takes them a couple of days to give us the report for then the inspection. And so I don't know what people are doing for, that line item in the schedule, but if you're not putting in a week, at least put a day in. And a lot of times that day is Saturday, and it's like, okay, all right, you're paying double now for Brian to come and his crew to come out on a Saturday because you didn't put in the schedule, because it's definitely required. All right, so we have a few more people in the queue. Felipe, or actually, sorry, Jeremiah. One, I need to get your sticker, sweet sticker. But Jeremiah, come on board and ask your question, my friend.
Nope, I don't know if you guys can hear me there.
Yep.
There we go. I was just curious about it's not really maybe a rumor that I had heard about the possible development of AeroBarrier being used from like the top side in a vented attic, with the house being depressurized and pulling that mix down to seal the backside of a ceiling. That's one of the things, the areas we see in retrofits where we do a lot of remodeling on exterior walls. But the attic often doesn't necessarily need to be touched. We don't have equipment in most of our attics here in Ontario. So oftentimes it's maybe some rewiring and a few things like that, but maybe minimal activity up there. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, that's impressive. Yeah, good rumor. It's in development, kind of beta testing, if you will. Like it certainly it works, and we can do it. As a company, we're trying to figure out, like, can you make a business case out of it? And so we're working through that a little bit, trying to figure out what commercialization of it looks like at any sort of scale. So, but yeah, it does work, and we've done some cool applications in lots of parts of the world where you can get really targeted about how you apply it, and that's one of them.
Oh, interesting. Cool. Thank you.
So yeah, Brian, Jeremiah is one of those people you guys should definitely connect, because he's a good test case scenario. Want to try something out? He may have a couple projects in the hopper. You're like, well, if you want to do beta testing, I will be the candidate to be the beta tester.
I'm currently
Brian,
only about an hour down the road from you on Lake Huron.
Cool.
Brian, full disclosure, if you see a white Tacoma behind you on the highway, that is Jeremiah. That's how he's finding out all your info.
And then if all of a sudden you see some little donkey stickers on your trucks, those are from him as well. And we do need to get a couple of those, Jeremiah. Next time I see you,
I'll figure out a way to get them to you.
Absolutely. And I have to say too, is if you're planning to go to the International Builder Show, check out, AeroBarrier's booth. They've got some really good details that really kind of talk about some of the things that Brian's talking about. So, definitely add that to your miles of walking in Vegas. But you need to check out the booth, because some very informative information. I think we had Felipe. I think Felipe, we answered your question, but you're always good to come on. So what questions or comments do you have there, Felipe?
Hey guys, how are you? So thank you, Brian.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you guys. Nice to see you. Great presentation, Brian. So we're mainly into retrofits, and I mean, barrier work is always expensive. How good or how confident are you in just using, let's say, AeroBarrier as basically the only air barrier solution for an envelope? I think one of the best case studies that I saw was the no demo retrofit from, I think it was Amélie Caron. And listen, I think it's a good solution for clients that are not ready to, invest in heavily into an envelope work, but keep a conservative budget and just use AeroBarrier.
Yeah, it's like, I think I sort of said it. Maybe I'll try again. Like, it's in my mind, it's the best solution. When we do You know, we do it, our group, we do quite a bit of it, mostly in like low income housing settings. Just in that, you know, it's really easy to do. It's an extra little bit of work to cover things off. And if you're not terribly concerned if there's a little bit of sealant on whatever is there, then yeah, let's go. And we can get you'll see that kind of, maybe not quite the same 70% that we see on new construction, but we've done enough of them. I can tell you we can do, you know, 40-50% reduction in air tightness. We did a handful of ones here where it was did AeroBarrier, switch or duct sealing, switch to a heat pump, cut the carbon in half for that building. And we've done that and we did that in the week that the house sold before the homeowner came in. So it's like, you want to turn these over and make an impact without taking down walls. You know, it's people's stuff. That's when it gets really hard. But if the house is empty, we can do it. You know, you have to kind of set expectations that, you know, someone might find sealant later. And so you can clean it up. You can get it off whenever you don't want it to. It cleans off with some elbow grease. But the last thing you want is the homeowner going, what the heck did you do? So we shy away from it sometimes from that standpoint.
Excellent. Thank you.
But Felipe, I've been in lots of conversations. I'm going to say at least a dozen where individuals have talked to the real estate board in definitely Vancouver and in BC. And I know, I think it's gone up even to Canada where, you know, if they could change the transition from sale to walk-in in the real estate market, where you could, like, in a sense, the real estate board would pay for air sealing our homes, even if it became like a federal grant. The one day that AeroBarrier could go in and seal up all of our homes, especially when we're talking about, you know, the climate emergency and doing things. I mean, one, it's like Connor, you're talking about getting stocks and air seal. I'm like, yeah, it's definitely a discussion we need to have offline here of how to things. But, you know, there's potential where air seals industry could grow, you know, 100-fold. You know, it's 100x conversation, because if the real estate board could make that change and you have reputable dealers like Brian and you know, even in Vancouver, we've got Pacific AeroBarrier. And if you don't know Pacific AeroBarrier's Instagram account, you should, because their marketing is like, it's the best. It's fantastic. They purge on, like, you know, some trademark infringement because it's so good. But so, you know, you talk about air sealing, and I know we'll get PH Molnar on in a second here because he's talking about, you know, homes need to breathe. There's a great opportunity that we could seal up a lot of homes in that real estate transactional transition. That could be really good. I mean, we could get into a bit of the building science and some of those concerns, but there's a great way that we could deal with our current stock by having Brian come in, you know, and do what they need to do.
Maybe Brian, just for Peter, just maybe a question just from myself. I don't need to know the franchise amount, but I'm curious. When you think about your solution, it's pretty impressive product and offering. It's both diagnostic, it's a service, it's a solution. When that truck shows up, if you have a young person inquiring to you about a franchise, what does that look like for them? Is that a trailer that they then outfit with equipment? Is this a mass of operation? Is it a small thing they can run? Is it big? Just maybe just walk us through what it feels like to run one of your franchises.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a dealership model, and so that is a bigger distinction than it probably is on the surface. And the idea being is, yeah, so generally you would buy the equipment and that kind of, and the training that comes along with it, and then you become a licensed installer, and then it's really your business to run. And so we have really successful dealers that their business model is doing 25 nice custom homes a year, and then we have dealers that, you know, want to build an outfit that has, you know, a contracting company of 5 or 6 crews, 10 crews on the road. And so there is everything in between. Really getting started, it's you buy the equipment. There's an upfront cost, but, you know, roughly think about maybe $100,000 to kind of get going, plus some, you know, whatever it takes to get a business off the ground, you know, money on the side. And from there, you know, there's an ongoing license fee structure that you buy the sealant, and so it's a pretty canned business model, but there's flexibility within it, depending on who wants to take it on. I will say we do try to vet it a little bit too. It's not, if we get 10 calls today saying, hey, I want to buy it, it's not here you go, here you go, here you go. We try to find the right partners across the country that maybe have a base knowledge of building science, really want to make a go at it. So it's a, it's a controlled network as we try to, find the right need and fit. And we want to be fair to the dealers that have already bought in. So there's a balance to it.
Great, thank you.
Well, we are at the top of the hour, gentlemen. And I mean, Brian's been on for a hard 60 minutes, talking about some great details. So if there aren't any questions, maybe we'll wrap it up. But Mr. PH Molnaire, with your cheeky comment, do you want to come on and discuss what it is all about when we deal with air tightness? I think he actually snuck off. Anyhow, Peter was just talking about House Needs to Breathe, or Does It? And that's a very good book by, again, another massive building science nerd, Mr. Allison Bales. And again, as we get to those air tightness, this is where mechanical ventilation has to come in and be a part of it. So your ERV or HRV, depending on where you are in this great nation of 3 oceans touching our land.
It is a blessing. I'll say, so I work kind of in a North American capacity, and a lot of my US counterparts, they're spending half their time convincing the builder too that they need this thing called an ERV, and they're fighting 2 battles at once. And it is nice here in Canada that we're kind of through that hurdle for the most part on the new construction side. And so we are ahead of Texas in that space. So that's good.
Well, and even Texas, again, having to deal with dehumidification. I mean, in Ontario, you guys have to deal with it more than we have to do on the West Coast. But in Texas, they've got some great products. So I'll just give a shout out to Santa Fe and some of the efforts there. Like, there is some good. Hey, Peter, how you doing? Hit the
There we are. I found the microphone control in this thing.
Well,
Sorry, it's different.
You're being so cheeky that you got distracted probably under a bucket of cheesies or something over there.
No, I've been listening and watching. This is very good to know. And yeah, but doesn't the house have to breathe? That's the old concept. And what can we do to get less resistance to improving building codes in the official side of things? Because, like your Vancouver, you're doing great stuff. And it's very progressive there. It's getting nearer and nearer. Whatever we don't talk about, the Fight Club method.
Yeah. Well, no, but Peter, with that too, I mean, was interesting when Vancouver started to do their tests. So in the first kind of years before they mandated, our blower door scores were terrible. Like, they were on average 4.5 to 4.7, and it slowly got down. Whereas in Ontario, they were averaging 2.5, right? Like, there was already, builders in Ontario just knew to add more acoustical seal everywhere, because I guess there's a deal on it or something, because it's expensive out here and we didn't apply it properly. But the air sealing detailing in BC, especially in Vancouver, was not at the levels of Ontario. And so it was definitely interesting to see earlier on about comparing. And so for builders in Ontario to kind of be able to improve from 2.5 to 1 to 1.5 wasn't that big of a stretch. So, but again, I mean, luckily we've got some really good building science scientists around there that are producing good books, and Gord and the entire team that is happening over there, they're out there, and that's where our construction association across North America. I mean, it was great that recently here in Vancouver, we finally had our CHBA BC at their first conference, and great speakers. And not only, I mean, the thing about where we're leading to is now building science and air tightness is not like the first and the hottest topic. Now we're talking about AI and prefabrication and some of those other things that we've been waiting to kind of get onto an average docket of a conference. So all the work that Gord and all of us and all the other individuals about talking about air tightness is starting to land. And if not, it'll be code. So it's good.
Just a super short follow-up to that. Sean, you're right. We're always moving in the right direction. We're always passionate. And Peter, I hear you. It'd be nice if we had a measured metric in Ontario to strive towards, right? Let's measure. I just took a net zero builder course the past 2 days. Do you know the city in North America that has the highest number of certified net zero homes?
Oh.
All in North America. Anybody
I
know?
do, only because of one prefab builder. So why you know why don't we, everyone who's still listening, those millions and millions that are with us right now, put it in the chat. What city
In
in
North
North
America
America?
has the most amount of net zero certified homes?
Units or
Okay,
absolute?
you know what? You're not allowed to vote, Justin.
So
Take other choices.
Justin said Edmonton. David said Iqaluit.
Yeah. What's interesting though is, we'll so for all those that know Monty Paulson, who unfortunately recently passed away, we're having a celebration of life next week. In the effort of just, working with him and knowing, what, you just do one thing and the ripples of what one thing could happen. And if I believe the answer that I think is correct here, Connor, is, what, all I had to do was put a solar panel on your roof. And all of a sudden, it changed all the developers' minds nearby of what needed to happen. So, we'll give 30 more seconds. We're going to drag this out because we want some more involvement from the audience here of
So
random.
Noah says Sacramento. Leo says Boston. Felipe, I appreciate it. Toronto's usually the answer. Jeremiah says New York. Steven says Westport, and Peter says Vancouver.
So, I would have thought Ithaca, New York, because there's actually a really cool high performance village there, co-housing. That was earlier on. However, Connor, give us the answer.
London, Ontario. Right?
Yeah.
That's surprising.
Now, Justin, I have to say is, until recently, Edmonton I know was the answer because, and this is maybe a bit of a COVID issue, is Reason to Zero from Landmark Homes literally was able to prefabricate net zero homes with his prefab site. But because he literally put on a couple of solar panels, the owners took on and was like, I don't want two solar panels, I want the entire roof. And I know that 50% of all net zero homes in Canada until maybe this till London were in Edmonton. It was unbelievable how many high performance net zero homes were in Edmonton because of one developer.
Yeah, it's really impressive. It's for anyone here who's not from Ontario. London, Ontario is where I'm born. It's a town of 400,000 people. It's a medium-sized city for Ontario. But not what you think as being like a leader, but it shows you builders there and developers who understand the system, have learned how to measure, and clearly have found business in building, a lot of Doug Terry homes. But it just shows you, like, I think this is the benefit of when developers honestly see a business angle, can make that work for them. It really helps us, build that sense of awareness. They're able to market it. CHBA gets behind it with programs and education, and that makes these discussions a lot easier. So, yeah, it's really fantastic.
Yeah. And we're seeing that here in Ontario when one builder moves to the next. So Mattamy Homes, the largest builder in Canada, all of their single family is basically going net zero now. And so if as a custom builder, it's hard to say I can't do that when the biggest builder is finding a way to do it at scale. And the other next wave of biggest builders are not far behind them. So it's cool to see. There's definitely it doesn't always feel that way, but there's a real momentum behind both net zero and passive house labeling across North America.
Yeah. Brian, I mean, what's nice too about what Mattamy is doing is, I mean, we talk about affordability all the time. Like every Canadian home builder conference is always about affordability. And, there's lots of discussion about what affordability needs to be. But when a big company can look at their economies of scale and be able to make it better with, like, what, it is actually better for business for us to do this and do it and mandate it. And now it really, says to everyone else, like, we do it, why can't you? And that means every little single builder is like, oh, well, I need to up my game because the big builders made it, part of their ethos of the company. It's phenomenal. All right,
Definitely.
gentlemen. Well, that being said, is we did kind of push an extra 13 minutes out of Brian, and I know it's late for some of you. Always a pleasure. If any other comments, you got like literally 30 seconds to put it in there. Otherwise, we will wrap up. Can you believe it? The 10th month, the 10th edition of BS&BEER Canada for 2024. We're getting into Q4. We're planning 2025. You can believe it, folks. We will continue to bring out amazing speakers like Brian, and we'll definitely make sure that we all show up because it is a pleasure to learn building science. And again, Brian, like I appreciate you bringing a bit of history because what your family has done for our for not only just Canada but for North America, for making sure that we take on some of those early Saskatchewan roots, and now they're Canadian roots. And even those Germans that took on Passive House, they still have to apply some of their knowledge to the hardworking individuals in Canada. So great efforts. And again, I look forward to seeing you in person soon enough. And for all of you, see you later. Go home, you hosers. Take off, eh?
Thanks, guys.
See you, Brian.
Thanks,
Thanks for your
Brian.
time.
And gents, I will stick around. I will kick Peter off. He's got to go to bed. And let me hit the